to another episode of the Broadwater Collective. And we're doing something a bit different today. As you can see, we don't have our normal setup with the mics, and not everybody's here on the Gold Coast. And we're actually testing something because we have a guest coming on from Sydney. And obviously, they can't come up to Queensland right now due to all of the restrictions. So we're having a test. We're doing this over Zoom today to see how we go, see the quality, and see how you guys like it. So without further ado, we got Chris, we got Sam, we got myself, Jason, and we're here. We're going to have some more topics today. We're going to talk about a range of different things. So let's just jump into the first one. And the first one is actually something I just read moments ago. The Virgin CEO came on and spoke with a news channel about his opinion of international travel. And he made a statement that says he doesn't think it's going to happen until 2023. That's a bit scary, isn't it?
That is scary. I don't like that.
What do we think of that?
Well, it depends what they mean in terms of international travel. Would that be like all countries, or will they just slowly release it where we can go to New Zealand? Like, I guess if things keep coming up in Victoria and cases keep increasing, then we won't be able to for a long time. And 2023, 2024 would be, where it would lie, I reckon.
Yeah.
I reckon they'll adopt some sort of visa system where you pay a lot of money to travel, because it's all about the flow, the amount of people, and controlling and coordinating and segregating to control any potential outbreaks of the virus and the like. So I think, it'll be a different world until there's the vaccine, and the vaccine is going to take potentially a few years. It's not a quick and easy thing to do.
I mean, he did specifically say he doesn't think it's going to happen for their airline until 2023. So we don't know what Qantas is thinking, for example. Like I don't know if statements made about international travel for Qantas. So it could just be him talk. And Virgin's going through a massive restructuring. So they're doing a bunch of different things. So that also could potentially be why that statement's been made. But I can't confirm that. But yeah, it's interesting you talk about the vaccine. That I've seen a lot of news come out even in the last week about, starting human trials, and this company's doing this and this company's doing that. Like, the race is really on. Like, when do you think it's going to be likely that a vaccine will actually be available to the mass market?
Well, I think like anything, when there's a big issue going on, they seem to fast track everything. So I think within a year to 2 years, I think there's still time, but you still have to follow some sort of steps, and you can't break too many loopholes. So probably a year or two.
And coming back to the travel thing, do you think potentially governments will put in place legislation that says you can only visit countries that have vaccines available?
Yeah, I think there'd be some sort of control measure like that.
That's really scary, because as it stands in the articles that I'm reading, it is saying that the vaccine is basically going to go out to all the rich nations first before anyone else. That's going to damage, emerging economies and emerging markets hugely, because they're the ones that are probably going to be last on the list to actually get the vaccine, which means last for tourism, last for international investment. It's going to be almost a segregation. There's going to be a whole world going on that the other half's not involved in, purely because of this vaccine.
Yeah.
Very good point. It'll just increase the gap between the rich, the high middle class, and the poor.
Yeah.
In many ways.
That's a huge problem. I mean, how do we even come around that solution? How do we make sure that the whole world can unite as one again? Is it just going to take time and time and time and time?
It's going to take a lot of time. And I think the countries that are underdeveloped are going to need to think of new ways and innovate to push through, like what businesses are doing now with working from home, doing Zoom calls like this. They're just going to have to think of things outside of the box to help come over the line. It's survival of the fittest at the end of the day. Like any country, any nation, any business, you just got to innovate or die.
Yeah. And that actually brings me towards another article that I read this week. It was to do with recruitment. And companies were now there's big companies like the biggest in the world that are now making statements about their staff permanently working from home. Like they'll never make them come back to the office. And
Yeah.
that means that hiring is also going to change dramatically, because you're going to be able to have access to a talent pool that's all over the world, not just in your local area anymore, or working for you from home. Like I know that was possible before, but it's just becoming so much more prominent now, and it's probably going to become a thing of the future. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be crazy. Like you could work for a company in the US, which you might not have had access to before, because working from home is suddenly globally accepted.
Yeah.
So
It's pretty cool and exciting in that forced innovation way. Like the higher level company innovators have had the vision for decades of working from home, the concept, and they'll give the direction to the business to do it. And where it will fall over is the middle management, because they're the ones that have to really deal with the teething issues of it. They're the ones that have their people that report to them, and they're used to having the desk allocations and say, well, he's in at 5 and leaving at 5, in at 8, leaving at 5, she's in at 8, leaving at 5. And that's kind of how they measure the productivity of what they're doing. It's not efficient. It's not effective. The future is the performance-based management. You measure people's worthiness based on their performance, and the system's not going to work for everyone. It's going to be a combination of the environment they're working in, the job they're doing, the individuals of the boss and the individuals of the employee. And when all those things work, it's a much better solution. Anyone in the high level management that I've discussed it with have been huge advocates of working from home. They're like, it's so much easier to manage and measure performance. And for them personally, and for me as well, it's such a more effective way to work. It's so much more efficient. You're cutting out the commute. So instead of spending an hour in a car getting stressed and frustrated, you get up, you go for a run, you do some yoga, you're cooking good foods. It's such a healthier mindset. And businesses realize the benefit of happy employees. Like that work-life balance concept is being rolled out more and more. That mindfulness leadership is being rolled out more and more, because if you want creative innovation and high quality work and output, you want your employees to be happy. You want your employees to be low stress. That's when you get the best results. So when we start to adopt and adapt, and homes start getting built with separate study areas and the like, it's going to be that forced innovation for the better. But you raise a fascinating point that I never really thought of, and I only just spoke to someone yesterday about, is the global competitiveness. Now there's opportunity, but we're also going to be competing with the whole world on wages and jobs in the very near future.
That is fascinating too, because I never thought about it that way. Like, yeah, you're competing for talent, obviously, because everybody can work from home, but suddenly the wage issue starts coming in too. Like outsourcing has always been a thing. Like you can outsource simple tasks to India or to wherever else. You can outsource
like freelancer, right?
Yeah, exactly. But imagine, I never really thought of like an engineering role, for example, being outsourced to another country where they can do the exact same job, but they're going to do it for a fraction of the salary that an Australian would demand, for example. Yeah, I never even considered that. That's crazy.
Because we've started that because we're a global company. We'll work package certain projects where possible to engineering functions in cheaper countries, because the technology allows it.
Yeah,
and you're getting the same quality. The only restrictions are time zones, but again, there's ways around that. And it turns you into a 24/7 operation. So sometimes it can be a benefit where it gets towards the end of the day, and you're like, well, we need this done, and then you communicate that to the office over in another time zone, and then when you're asleep, they're working on that. Like if you can manage it effectively and have it set up properly, it makes you a strong competition.
Wow, that's actually true. You can build a much more efficient company on the 24/7 clock, and potentially even it's going to cost you less.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's where
That's insane. You know, like
That's
we're blocking our ability to actually go to other countries, but we're opening up our ability to attract talent from other countries and make our companies more efficient.
Yeah, and that's what this will change.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
That's a good point. It's like the world's smaller in some ways and so much bigger in others as a result.
yeah,
Yeah. It's like a shift in productivity. It's like back in the day when you had the mailman dropping your mail off at your house, which we still have. But then the internet come around, and then we have email. So the information transfer and productivity has increased from that. So having people working from home, and then having people in other countries working for your company as well, like in different time zones, yeah, of course, it increases your productivity, and it's a lot more versatile. It's
yeah,
not just someone dropping the mail off at your house. It's me sending an email to you, sending an email to Sam, sending that email to 100 people
yeah,
at the same time.
yeah,
And it's the educational platforms, the in-house company trainings, they're all moving to this online model where it's almost the concept of where AI is at the moment, where if you can have something as a data set and then perfect it and then multiply it across many nodes, that's pretty much what AI is doing. It's just making things more efficient. Anything repetitive.
yeah,
A lot of the ways these training packages are somewhat repetitive, and that's where the world's moving to is online training for a lot of things. It's not going to replace everything, but again, even with live feeds of training. So with our company, if we've got a global training initiative to roll out, you only have to really do it twice across two major time zones, and most countries can accommodate and dial into either or of those. So from a global perspective, it can be split into two quite easily.
yeah. Okay, that's a good
What do
point.
you think about, so like we were saying before about the pay, right? People in other countries will be getting paid less, but producing pretty much the same, if not more productivity. So if the first world goes to a point where we're working from home, then we actually become equal competition, right? So then what impact would that have on our pay as opposed to the pay from outsourcing overseas? And like,
Yeah,
will that enable them to rise up to our level of the first
My
world?
my guess
it
is
does.
that
Yeah,
my guess is that the government would actually step in and put certain restrictions on the amount that you can outsource from an Australian company. That's my guess. Otherwise, you would absolutely decimate the economy. Imagine if you had negative wages because of competitiveness, sorry, with other countries.
but you've got to think we do it now with physical manufacturing. And what
Yeah,
did the government do? They're only just starting to catch up with legislation and say, all right, if the government's building something, they want half of it built in the country.
yeah,
Like they're so slow and behind the times with these rapid changes that we may not see it for a few years, if ever. And it may well be like when we outsourced manufacturing, that did give a lot of those third world countries a middle class.
Mm.
So it might take a few years to say, well, all this professional work's being done overseas, and as a result, there's a lot of unemployment and wages are dropping. And then you'll start to see the government catch up with some legislations and make it a bit um, more opportunity for the country that's representing the product. But
yeah,
yeah, I don't know. I haven't really given it enough thought.
Yeah, there's so much involved because like it's essentially decentralization of the
that's exactly what it
worldwide
is. Yeah,
workforce,
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and that's huge.
And when you look at this working from home concept, and you combine it with where AI is going, like it's again like from a very top level CEO perspective, it's all very exciting. The capabilities that you're going to unlock and the efficiencies that you're going to build and the productivity and the innovation that you can introduce. It's like it's the forced innovation that's going to make companies better. It's a real benefit to the capitalist model. So from a business perspective, I'd be getting very excited about the changes that have been forced and what that's going to mean when we go back to some kind of normality, the aftermath. People working from home, people using the technology more and more and feeding their skill sets into this data capturing system that's going to be building the artificial intelligence of a lot of companies, where we talk about every job's at threat to AI. It's like, well, yeah. And the more we work remotely, the more we're teaching AI how we do what we do. It's pretty cool and scary.
I can see how you'd be excited from a CEO or management point of view, but as an employee, that's scary as shit.
Yeah.
But history shows, you know.
What do you think it would do in the mental health space, though? So say if you have all these people working at home, the first thing that comes to mind with me is you're sort of taking a lot more emotion out of the business, because people you're talking to on the day-to-day basis is just solely over the computer. So like, you know, people on Facebook and bullying and that, people are just way more inclined to say what they want to anyone at any time over a social network, because they don't have a lot of that personal touch, the personal interaction.
Yeah.
So like,
Oh,
do you think
yeah.
over time it would just, business would become extremely emotionless? And
I think,
what would
how
that
do
do for
you
the health of individuals?
how do you treat your IT support? So IT support in the 90s got moved overseas to cheaper countries like India. People are horrible to the IT support. So I was thinking, in a professional environment, you won't see it. You won't see the toxicity that you see on social media, but you will. You will, because we've already seen it with
Exactly.
IT support. That's a very good point.
And the other major issue here that I'm seeing is, you know, you build a company, and like when it's in the startup phases and it becomes its own identity of sorts, like it's a living organism. You feed it by the talent that you bring in, right? You feed the beast. Like you build your company based on who's there. Your cultural fit is based on the people. That's who's there at that point in time and where you want to go with your company. It's a constant evolving thing that's just pivoting in every direction based on the staff there and the talent that you can attract.
Yeah.
If you're not meeting these people and you're not actually, you know, working with them in an office every day, it becomes very, very important to sort of gain a sense of who they are as a person before you hire them, but from the other side of the world and without meeting them. And I think there's still massive barriers in place where, like you said, Sam, like you can already see the negatives of just hiring people overseas that just for the fact of, oh, they're cheaper. The culture is terrible. You know what I mean? Like you need to still be able to hire the right people that you're going to get on with over Zoom calls, that you're going to still enjoy working with. You still have all the same cultural fit issues with this, but I don't see a solution on how it can be solved just yet.
It would be a dangerous move to do it purely based on it being a cheaper option.
Yeah, that would be very dangerous.
That would be the wrong move.
Yeah.
You would have to be doing it based on perfecting that talent find and go, well, this person's actually the best fit for this company, and geographical disposition is no longer a limitation. So our pool of potential employees has 1,000 folded, and that's going to be beneficial for the company and the employee if we get it right, because then people have the capability to work in jobs that fulfill them. Like that's where that interface can eventually get to.
Yeah. Like imagine, you know, there's a lot of people that are working a job right now that they don't really like, but you know, they live in X town and there's only a certain amount of jobs in X town. So they find the one that, you know, they like the most or that they can get a job at. Their dream job exists somewhere in the world, right?
Yeah.
But it might not exist where they live, and maybe they don't have the means to go and move elsewhere. This whole model of like the decentralization of jobs could mean that, like, you know, everybody could eventually actually end up working their dream job in a different country or a different, you know, whatever else. It's whole decentralized. You can go looking further than ever before to find what you're good at.
It might lead to geographical change where you could start your dream job and then after a few months you move there and it does require physical showing up somewhere.
Yeah. it's like a test period. You could almost like work from home to see if you like it enough to actually move somewhere.
Because I think the perfect model is you go in 1 or 2 days a week as required type thing. You're still going into a location and physically meeting people at times where possible, or at least in certain hubs. And it'd be interesting to see what suburbs and towns end up doing if everyone is working from home, say 4 days a week. Will they generate social cyber hubs or social hubs, or will the local cafes be so much more popular and community based, and you'll see people at parks with laptops open, and how will people get that human interaction that we all desire so much, that we get a lot from our workplace? Like, a lot of people I've spoken to are really finding it hard not being in the office meeting and talking to people, and they're not getting that motivation. That's where the managers need to step in and understand their people and how to motivate them. And maybe it's not going to work for everyone, but I think in a lot of ways it's just the requirement of finding out how to do it more effective and finding a balance. And I'd love to see like local small cafes and little social physical locations within suburbs cater more for it. And
I mean, I suppose that's what the likes of WeWork and all these shared working spaces have been trying to do, to some success and failure. But what you said before actually really interests me. Like, you're absolutely right. You could be sitting at a table with 4 people you've just met. Oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm a salesman in London. Oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm actually an engineer in Dubai. But we're all sitting at the cafe together in Brisbane. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that is so fascinating. And if that's where the world is going, I say hoorah. That's pretty
It's
cool.
100% where it's going. It just speeds up productivity on a global scale. And that's everything that we've been doing in humanity is been pushing that way. So that's how we're gonna go. And like, there's going to be a lot of implications on like commercial properties and things like that. I even just thought about daycare centers as well, because people will be at home, they can look after their kids. All these Band-Aid solutions, all the retail stores, everyone will be shopping online a lot more because they're always at home.
Even residential property, there's no requirement to live 5 kilometres from the CBD to get a shorter commute, because there's not as much commute to work. Like, it's
well, that's it. Do people need to live in a city if they don't want to anymore? As soon as they're getting their income online, it's like, hey, I don't need to be here.
You know what's going to be really interesting is how do we deal with certain things that are already in place? Like, I'm thinking that, if you're working for a company overseas or whatever, you're offering a certain set of skills. It's almost like, and I know this is only Australia, but I'm just using it as an example because we all understand it. It's like every single person would need their own ABN. Like,
everyone becomes a contractor.
Every single person becomes a contractor. There's no necessity to pay super. There's no necessity to pay sort of insurances on employees or anything like that. It would change the entire landscape of what's built in Australia and like the system we have in place.
Does that shrink the government or change the government or make it bigger?
It would kill the superannuation industry, which is, it's a massive backbone of investment in our country for sure. And for retirement, obviously it's massive. If you suddenly had a whole country just as consultants, basically, with no set rules of how much money you have to put into your super, the economy would thrive because people are spending more money if they were on the same, sort of rate respectively. But what happens when you get to retirement is that the government would have to end up funding a lot of people's retirement through pensions and that sort of thing. So the standard of retirement, I think, would drop dramatically if that were the case. The other thing is, if you're a consultant, you have the means to make tax deductions about anything you need to do, unlike employees. So the actual taxable income to the government would probably be smaller, which means less spending on, all sorts of things. So in one sense, it's actually good for the economy because there'll probably be more money flowing into it, but it's bad for retirement and bad for government income. So there's so many different factors to consider. which is
Yeah.
why I think that if it did happen, the government would have to step in and make certain legislation around how it's going to work.
Yeah, and they find a way.
Yeah, and like it's almost like the governments of the world would have to communicate and make it sort of like a process that sort of works for every country.
What do you reckon it would do for something like Bitcoin? If, you know,
Well,
you could really see this going
that's the thing.
off the rail.
You could-
blockchain technology.
Everyone just gets paid in Bitcoin, and what can the government do then? And
Yeah, like good luck taxing me on my Bitcoin.
the New World Order.
Yeah, it's like you're decentralizing the entire job market and the monetary market. Like
Exactly.
you could technically decentralize every country by doing that, making like
I mean,
making a hub where everybody just like goes after talent and then gets paid in this hub, which is literally decentralized from banks, it's decentralized from countries, decentralized from governments. That could happen.
that could be where we talked about that world where it's run by businesses and not governments.
Yeah.
Because you've essentially cut off the income to the government.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing, because like, you know,
It could go two ways. It could
government
go
spending.
very, very well, or it could,
Yeah.
you know, be
You need government.
You need some sort of control. As much as we talk about, you know,
governance and ethics
controlling people, there does need to be some sort of regimented control of society to a degree.
I mean, you'd completely decimate the quality of the area that you live in. Just think about it. If there's
exactly, who's going to build the roads?
Who's going to fix the roads? Who's going to do this? Who's going to make sure the sidewalks?
It's not going to be the company, because you're not driving to work anymore.
Exactly.
Like, it would have to be people donating to a local community source.
Yeah.
So that could work if there is, you know, other companies set up to arrange a local donation style aspect. But I think, you know, the way the government's set up is the best way to manage that.
Well,
that governance and ethics.
Actually, there might be another solution, right? When you own an apartment in a strata titled building block, you have to pay a body corporate. And so that maintains the building. Imagine if you lived in a suburb where
city corporate,
you want to live here, you got to pay your city corporate, and you all just, if you want to live there, you have to pay that. So you don't pay taxes per se, but you pay a city corporate, which basically takes care of the maintenance, and that maintenance can be contracted out to a private company. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's right. Private companies are all over that.
Yeah.
If you think about it, councils like get subcontractors all the time to do a lot of their work.
Yeah.
Which is private owned.
The problem is corruption. We would need pure transparency of information to make it work, because human beings, unfortunately, history shows, modern day shows, it's too susceptible to greed and corruption. So you would have who funds the police force, and then if you have big donators, what are they getting in return?
Well, that's the thing.
Or is it
you don't take donations. Basically, you have to come up with a system where it's purely based on everybody pays the same thing, whether you're a billionaire or like a no one, you pay the same amount, so that it basically means that capitalism rules. But you try to somehow make it so that it's not corruptible. You don't take donations. You don't take these sorts of things that allow influence.
It's just, I don't know, it doesn't seem like you see the movies where this sort of thing happens, and it's like, if everyone's paying the same amount, then you're going to live in a location where people are earning pretty much the same amount as you. So we get that segregation of society purely based on wealth. Which, you know, we have to an extent in any case, but I'd have to give that a few days of thinking to see where that could lead to. But
there's definitely tons of holes in theory. It's just amazing to think that we actually live in an age where, like, it's possible to decentralize all these things that we're talking about. 20 years ago, you wouldn't have dreamt of having these sort of conversations.
You wouldn't even consider it.
Yeah. It just makes you look forward and go, man, so many things are good, have the potential to change. And I'm not saying they're good or bad. you can see the potential of how things can definitely change and mix up the order of how things are.
And do you think we'll get to a world in the near future where it starts to integrate into video games? And then we were talking about on other podcasts where people get paid to play video games to level up on other people and the like. But what about if companies find a way to integrate into video games research and development? So you're playing a virtual reality video game, but really you're actually researching a new vaccine because they find a way to sort of make things integrate from the artificial into the real world.
I think that's pretty far-fetched, but I think that could happen.
That's extremely far-fetched, but yeah, like I get it. It's almost like you're taking every single data point that exists and like digitalizing it. So you can sit there in VR and basically have zero distractions, or maybe, I don't know how you'd pull it off.
By the time you get to that level, they'll just have AI itself figuring shit out for us.
Yeah.
Like, they won't.
Not necessarily though. Because we're still that node feeding into the AI, like it hasn't transcended into a higher consciousness yet. So let's say we're still in the level it's at now, and the video game, you don't even know that you're working for a company. You're just playing a video game, but it's actually a real problem they're trying to solve, and you're solving it as part of the video game.
It's very interesting perspective, Sam.
Because you look at science and research, and it's just trial and error of applying these atoms to these atoms and see what happens. And it's like, well, these bacteria react to these viruses like that. So you could be there. And video games these days are doing that. It's like people like problem solving. That's what most video games are. It's just some are more cartoonish and violent than others, and others are pretty much a science lab set up. And people want to go in and pretend they're a scientist for half an hour or whatever. But imagine if you can integrate the two worlds, either knowingly or unknowingly to the player, and it's almost like their hobbies and video games become their job.
Yeah.
I'd like to see an example of how that would be used.
Well, you know how I think about it, and this this is going to be a long way to explain it, but it's only because like I've done a lot of like research for some reason on just like the history of mankind in the last couple of weeks. Do you know how long humans have been around, Sam? It seems like something you would know.
I'd say 200,000 years ago we were pretty well developed to where we are now.
Yeah. Okay, so even just in our current sort of form, 200,000 years, right? I was doing some research, and it was only 12,000 years ago that the first city actually existed, where like humans actually hubbed together and said, right, we're going to live here. Okay. And at that point in time, there was only 5 million people on the planet in total. 5 million.
Yeah.
So in a short amount of time, we've gone from 5 million to 7 odd billion, right? We are like going crazy with the population growth. And I think it peaked in the 60s or the 70s, where like the average household, I think, was having like 4 or 5 kids. And now the average has come to 2. We're starting to have kids later in life, et cetera, et cetera. So they're predicting that like population will still grow, but because we're educating emerging companies and emerging markets, not companies, emerging markets and emerging cultures into like sort of the first world integration, they're also starting to have less kids. Because the whole concept was that you have 5 kids because 3 of them won't make it past the age of 5. So 2 actually, but now we're at an age. You have 5 kids, they're all going to live, basically.
And if you had a farm, you have 10 kids because then you've got 10 employees.
Oh,
and you know, it's your superannuation as well. Like it was thought of in a lot of ways back in the day as you know, survivability of not just your genetic code, but yourself physically.
Exactly. So, like continuing on from that, we've gotten to a point now where like, you know, we're still growing. There's still more and more and more and more and more people on the planet. Something's got to give. Something has got to give. And I'm not talking about global warming, and I'm not talking about any of that. I'm purely talking about back to what we were saying before about the whole jobs market and the whole decentralization of the world. we are so connected and we are so overpopulated in, you know, certain areas of the world. Something's got to give, where like we all just start to connect as one instead of like just, and I know coronavirus is doing the opposite, like we can't go overseas now, but we're doing it in a digital way.
I think it is. And what's happening is we found this thing called social media, and it connected us all, and we did it wrong. We did it with this toxicity. We used our, you know, it was an ego interaction. It was like, hey, look at this photo of what I have. Hey, look at how much money I have. Hey, look at this new car I've got. But now it's changing. We're learning. We're starting to get more interacting like we would interact with our community. That's starting to appear online, and that toxic behavior is starting to be shunned and removed. Like this whole movement, whilst it's, you know, very far, let's say left, it's pushing the trajectory in the right direction. So we are more interconnected than ever, absolute. And we're starting to learn consequences of that negative aspects of the interaction. And people are getting kinder online. Like the thing you're just talking about right now, we're going through those teething growing pains. We were the toddler that was just throwing rocks and screaming and hitting each other. Now we're kind of the 8-year-old that's a bit nicer and still trying to work it out. Like we're still at such a young stage of this interconnectivity, and it's getting better.
Yeah. I have to, like, again, like after doing that research of, you know, the history of mankind and that sort of thing, how it took hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years to sort of make those adaptations in behavior, so that people started living together, they learned how to do things, and it takes hundreds of years. So what, like, I get what you're saying. Innovation bred this new tool for humankind, and it hasn't been around for that long, and we didn't know how to fucking use it. Now we're sort of learning how to use it for the betterment of mankind and for the betterment of the world. And it's a beast. It's like changing the game.
Why discover fire?
I was on a trail run this morning, and I ran past a dog, and I was just thinking, a dog used to be a wolf. It used to be a wolf. A wolf is savage. It will just it will kill and survive. And human beings pretty much breeded that out of the wolf by killing any bad wolf and rewarding any good wolf. We have done with a dog what we're trying to do with humanity, and we were just able to do it a lot quicker because the lifespan of a dog is a lot shorter. It's like we're going through this trial and error as human beings, and this integration into social media and online and the like is kind of speeding all that up again. We're becoming so much more self-aware because it's like there is consequence now. Like if humanity does something, there's that immediate consequence, and it kind of trains that out of us. Whether it's, you know, I like to think of it as trauma, and we've kind of talked about this in other podcasts. It's like everyone's got trauma, and the way it sort of manifests is all these evil behaviors that you interact with other people with or yourself with. And what we're trying to do as humanity is breed that trauma out of us and just become better people. Somewhere in there, this social media interaction kind of fits into that and speeds it up, I think.
I think I agree with you completely.
I think we're still very early on in the piece, like with
very
social.
Early.
It's got a long way to go. People are still figuring out how to use it for the good. There's a lot of people out there that are, and it's just showing everyone how to use it in a productive way and then move in that direction.
A good way to sort of explain it is like, imagine when we first discovered fire. We can cook food with this. Oh, wow, this can warm us up. Oh, wow, we can actually create more energy by burning things and doing this. How long would that have taken them to figure out?
You would have had some people that were arsonists.
And then it's like,
so it's the same with this whole digital age, you know. It's like we figured out, oh, well, we can do this with it. Oh, geez, actually, we can do this too. You're like, wow, we can do everything with this. We're still learning how to do it.
We could burn our neighbour's village down.
You can. You can hack things. You can use it for bad as well. But
Yeah.
Exactly.
imagine the first person who discovered fire obviously burnt themselves first, didn't they? So
Exactly.
it's basically what humanity's done with this whole social media thing. It's like we've burnt ourselves to learn not to touch the fucking flame. Now we use it
Yeah.
to try and make things better and our life better for ourselves.
Yeah.
That's actually a great way to put it.
It's a great way to put it. And people, using it for good and sharing the good,
Yeah.
so that people can see what is good.
For sure.
And we're still learning what good is. Like personally, I'm still learning what good is. That authenticity, that appreciation. It's not something that's really taught in school and university. It's the universe that teaches us it, and you've got to listen to the universe and analyze it and continually learn. And when you do learn, teach. Like if you learn something, discuss it with your friends and teach and be taught again. Don't convince yourself that you're the one that has all the answers. No one has all the answers. As humanity, we're learning all this together.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, guys, I think this is a good place to wrap it up. I think that's actually been an extremely interesting conversation on, where things.
That's been a really good chat.
Yeah.
That's why I love these chats. Like, how often would we sit down and, probably any time we sit down and talk, we go into this sort of stuff. But
Every time.
it really expands the consciousness.
Yeah.
Great.
And I suppose actually being on the technology and using it in this way to try and, create that positive vibe that we normally do in person on the podcast has just expanded our minds on, how the technology can be used for good in certain ways as well.
Exactly. We've preached our own
technology.
Exactly.
Have you hit record?
Yeah.
Speaking of technology,
I have hit record, so hopefully this gets uploaded and it's all good and everybody enjoys the chat. But anyway, guys, thanks again for joining us,
Awesome.
the Water Collective, Chris, Sam, and myself. And it's been a pleasure as always. And we got some clips lined up. We've got some good vlogs coming up. We're going to be doing some boating content, which is very exciting. And we've got some exciting guests coming on the podcast soon as well. So stay tuned. Lots of things happening, lots of things coming up. And hope you're having a good one and stay safe.
Stay safe. Have a good one.
Cheers.
See you guys. Cheers.